Morning, committee. It's nice to see everybody after an exciting weekend. I would like to welcome the Honorable Gene Vickery, Commissioner Vickery now, to the Senate Tax Committee with his grandkids who are paging for Senator Olson today. Would you please stand? Thank you. It's wonderful to see you. Thanks. Well, we'll go ahead. We do have a request for bill introduction. Senator Erickson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to request 24 RS 3030 relating to tax credits for certain education expenses.
Any questions? Any objections? We'll make the request. Thank you. Committee will open the hearing on Senate Bill 332. Amelia, will you give us an overview? And thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Senate Bill number 332 relates to the local ad valorem tax reduction fund, or as you may know it, the LAVTRF. And it would provide for the distribution of LAVTRF monies from the state to residential property taxpayers in the form of rebates. Specifically, the bill would discontinue certain existing provisions or procedures for the distribution of the local ad valorem tax reduction fund to taxing subdivisions that levy property taxes. Commencing during fiscal year 2025, one transfer of $50 million would be made annually on October 15th from the State General Fund to the LAVTRF. The state treasurer would continue to apportion and distribute the monies to the counties in accordance with the existing formula that's in statute. And if you're following along in the bill, those provisions will be found on page 6 and 7. Not later than 60 days from the date the distributed amount is received by the county treasurer, the county treasurer would then distribute the amounts to residential property taxpayers in the form of rebates in a proportion of the residential property's assessed value to the total assessed value of all residential property in the county. The rebates would be made in the form of either rebate checks or as credits against the current year's property taxes. And for purposes of these new provisions, residential property would mean both real property used for residential purposes as well as personal property mobile homes used for residential purposes. Also in the bill are provisions for annual reporting by the county treasurers to the Director of Property Valuation. Also provision for the Director of Property Valuation to annually report to the Legislature, and also a provision for Legislative Post-Audit Committee to annually direct a performance audit of at least 5 counties during calendar years 2025 through 2029. And the bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book, and I would be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Amelia. Committee, any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Committee will welcome our first conferee, Senator Rob Wilson, and thank you for bringing this idea to us.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You've got my written testimony, but last time I was in this committee, I think it was, I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, and I was working on the 20 mil property tax. I had a bill. Didn't go a long ways. We were still trying to figure out a way to do that. But once again, you know, with the surplus we have, I'm trying to figure a way to get the money back to the actual residents in Kansas. And so, you know, I worked with Amelia over the summer to come up with this version. It's either a credit or a refund. It's going back to the residential property tax across the board. Every county, I believe, has some formula. It's different percentages, but you know, this will give some of our residential property tax owners relief. Is it the easiest way? After thinking about this, there's probably other ways you could do it. Similar to like the homestead, you could have a refund at the tax level. But what I was trying to do was just, take a portion of what we've got over the next few years and see if we can't help lower the property tax. Because I think we've all heard from our constituents how property tax is one of their biggest challenges. And this would definitely help, seniors that are on a fixed income. It's not a lot, but a few percent will help out. So I think Amelia did a really nice job of talking about the one payment and how it works. So, I mean, with that, I'll stand for questions. I do have committee next door, so
We're going to go ahead
done.
and ask questions now. If you're
Okay,
okay with
that's
that.
fine, yeah.
Okay. Committee, any questions? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator, thanks for being here this morning.
Sure.
Okay, so I don't want to be real clear about this. Obviously, LAVTRF, we need to do something for, in my mind, our residential property taxpayers across the state. I guess my question about your particular scheme, how you're doing this, let me just ask you this question first of all. Did you run any numbers, basically, when you look at, say, maybe residential property, say, out in western Kansas, maybe rural southeast Kansas, maybe south central metropolitan versus northeast metropolitan? Did you look at any basically sort of how these monies would flow proportionally back to those different types of homeowners across the state? Did you run any scenarios on that?
I didn't run any scenarios. I was trying to use the formula that was already built up from the prior years on the LAVTR. My mission was to put a direct amount in there and split it out like had been done in the past to the counties. And they would then give it to the consumers by the valuation, is my understanding how it would work. 1% in Johnson County is probably more than 1% in some of the other counties, but when you look at the numbers, some of them are 2 or 3%. So I think they all pretty much equal out. I'm not for sure, but I'm just trying to get property tax back to people. I think there's a formula. It was already set up. I think it worked well, and when it was being used to be equal in all places or fair in all places. And so I thought we'd use the same formula let's ship this money, but change some of the parameters where the money has to go to the end residential person, property owner. And so that's been my mission, is more not changing the formula that was used, but to make sure the counties don't take the money and, do a bridge or do another, make sure, all the residential people get a piece back, so.
Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple follow-ups. Number one, I guess my question would be then is that, would you view this as a long-term solution, or do you have any concerns about the current way we assess property across the different property classes statewide? And is this in fact, while it's obviously it's good to provide homeowners property tax relief, is it basically kind of band-aiding an underlying issue of maybe we don't have property classes properly assessed across this state?
Well, I think a lot of this started back in, I think it was 85 or 86, under that constitutional amendment. We narrowed the tax base. And I think what we've raised on a certain group their taxes considerably. Well, we've tax exempt others, or there's less people paying. Now, I know the chairman's done a lot of work on this, but it's hard to put taxes back on. I don't think that's going to happen. So this is a way that we take some of the funds we got to give a little relief. And is it the answer? No, I'm hoping maybe some of you guys can even improve it. And maybe in the future, we can go a different direction with this. But the thing I hear, this is creative, don't get me wrong, and I'm not saying it's the answer. But doing nothing is not an answer either. And if this bill tweaked in any way you guys want to tweak it, is, gets through and passes, I'll be happy. Or if it completely changes and somehow we get property tax relief for them people, and then I'll be happy. So, I mean, I'm not saying this is the answer, but just sitting here doing nothing to help them people, them seniors. I mean, when they get their social security check and they get that standard of living increase, and it's taken up because the county has to raise taxes double, and that's happening year after year, there's no relief. And, that's not the answer. So, this is just a mechanism. Fix it if you think you can make it better. But I think we need to do something. And we've got the money to do it right now. And we need to, this is probably something that needs to have some interims, and we really need to work on seeing how we can get these property taxes down.
Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Olson, Senator Olson. I like the idea of giving it back to the residents. I think that's always more efficient when they have the check or the tax credits within their own purview of how to use those. I was wondering, just two questions, why you reduced it from instead of the 54 million, you went to 50 million, and why not just have it annually? Is it just a one and done, or do you just want it reoccurring? Thank you.
Did we put a sunset on that? I can't remember. Was it a one-time? Go ahead.
Madam Chair, it is actually a continuing, so it is a $50 million starting in fiscal year 2025, but it is annually thereafter.
Yeah. And the 50 million, it's a nice flat number. I know the 54 million is what they're believing they're short, or that number's out there, but I don't know. I'm just trying to get something started here, and I think it's a good, reasonable number. Did you have some? No? Okay.
Senator Blasey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Olson, for being here. I have a question on whether or not you have a preference. So in the tax bill that was passed last month by the legislature, there was an exemption on the state 20 mills that were levied on residential property owners, and every residential property owner that had a house that was worth at least $100,000 would see an immediate $127 reduction in their taxes. Whereas this bill, it's a formula, and formulas aren't always perfect because sometimes there's winners and losers, and we can debate formulas all day long. My question is, do you have a preference on what you think is best? Because you mentioned earlier some of the concerns about why this program was was no longer funded 20 years ago, partly because of concerns that counties and cities were not allowing this to pass through all the way to the residential customer, whereas the 20 mil exemption that the state levies is a clear, clean-cut savings for every residential property owner. So I'm curious if you have a preference on which policy you think is more effective.
Well, the tax bill, both tax bills have the 20 mil, 100,000 in it. So, I mean, I support that 100%. I think if that bill comes out by itself, it'd already be in law. I mean, it could have happened that quick. Sometimes I wonder, I don't know why it's in the mega piece, but I mean, I think if we had pieces coming out, that piece would be enacted. I think we should do that. I think we should do this too. I think they're two separate. One's the state portion. This helps with the local portion. So, I mean, we got people struggling. I think the property tax is the number one place where we need it taxed. I think the state, both of its bills, they've done a great job addressing that. And, I think, should be applauded for that. I think this is like extra effort, stuff we should have probably been doing back in the day. And so, I think this is, and if this is the solution on top of the 20 mils, the 100,000, then, definitely should do that, but we should figure something else out too for more. That's my
So if
opinion.
I may, there is a difference in those two bills. The legislature's bill has an an inflation buster for the property tax relief. It continues to increase the 100,000 exemption each year based off of inflation. So I'm just saying there is a difference between the
Okay.
two bills. I just want everybody to be aware. So Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As far as it relates to the bill, Senator Olson, the rebates, it says to such taxpayers shall be made in the form of rebate checks or as credits against the current year's property taxes. Who determines if it's a check or if it's a credit?
I believe that'd be the county.
That's not spelled out in the bill, though, correct?
Amelia, that'd be a question.
Amelia?
I thought it would be the county, or the locals would make that decision. Is it in? You know, if it's not in there, then that's something we can put in. But, you know, with an amendment, I would suggest, let's make sure it's specified.
I appreciate that. Then my final question is that very close to the end on page 9, you talk about there's a requirement for post-audit to audit at least 5 counties for 5 years, it looks like. And so this would take away time from our post-auditors on auditing, completing other audits. But I was curious as to why just the 5-year through 2029, the post-audit looking at 5 different counties.
You know, that's probably a sunset position, you know, but I would, you know, if you want to keep that going forever, I think that's great. I definitely served on post audit a lot of years. I understand the crunch, but I think this is important to at least establish, make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to. So especially if it's a new program, and I think this is not a complicated audit, I would say. I don't know how many, you know, days it would take or how many auditors, but I would think they could do this pretty quick. You know, it's not like they're chasing a lot down here, but this is to make sure everybody's being honest, make sure the money's getting back to the consumer.
I understand that. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, Roger Ham did provide a handout for this legislation. I think that'll be helpful. Thank you, Roger, and thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee. Appreciate it.
Committee, I will turn your attention to written testimony from Jay Hall, Michael Koss, Randy Leese, Amanda Stanley. Is there anybody that would like to testify positive? Seeing none, we do have an opponent testimony, Michael Austin. Welcome to the Tax Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Michael Austin. I'm the Legislative Director at Americans for Prosperity, Kansas, and I'm providing opponent testimony to SB 332. And I want to make sure that it's clear, I'm not providing opponent testimony because I'm against property tax reductions. Americans for Prosperity is, of course, always for broad-based tax reductions, whether it's income tax, sales, or, of course, property taxes. But the reason that I'm here is because I believe that how we reduce taxes matters just as much as the tax reduction itself. And when it comes to using LAVTRF, unfortunately, we have the position that that subsidy to localities unfortunately creates too many problems for the solutions that it possibly can give. And so I was here before speaking to a prior bill that also looked into reinstating LAVTRF, and most of those arguments that I gave at that last testimony still stand today, whereas this bill, unfortunately, as it stands, still violates local control. It gives the incentive for localities to make decisions based off of what they're going to get from state lawmakers or from state taxpayer dollars. And while I'm not smart enough to think about all the different ways that could come back at us, I am acknowledge that that can open a can of worms that we could never expect. Also, while Senate Bill 332 does allow for property tax rebate, and I will even give it to this particular bill that as opposed to the prior bill that reinstated the LAVTRF, this actually tries to force a reduction. Unfortunately, it still doesn't guarantee that mill levies will decrease. While you're providing a rebate, it says nothing of the fact of whether localities will actually do the work, do the due diligence, and making sure that they keep spending under control. So it's quite possible that we could have scenarios where the mill levy rises, property taxes rises, or appraisal rates rise, and taxpayers get a rebate, but they're still paying more in taxes than they did in prior years. So while I most certainly appreciate this effort, unfortunately, I think that this bill creates too many problems, and I think that there are clearly much simpler solutions for more broad-based reductions than to go through this second order or third order effect of reducing property taxes and creating a precedent that can take a life of its own. With that being said, I please would be open for any questions.
Thank you. Committee questions? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael, thanks for being here this morning. I'm going to ask you the same questions I asked Senator Olson. Just when you look at the way the state of Kansas assesses, does assess valuation across different property classes across the state, do you think that structure as it currently exists is appropriate? Do you think it maybe disproportionately favors one property class owner? Do you have any comments on that from AFP's perspective?
Thank you for that question, Senator Holland. If you will allow me to say, this is a topic that I have not researched recently. So I don't feel comfortable to give too much of an in-depth thought process to that, but I would say that I would welcome a conversation and discussion about that. I think that's definitely within the purview of this committee, and I would welcome to have a discussion and a debate about whether the current way that we assess property needs to stay or whether it needs to be revised. By all means, let's have it.
Okay. Follow up, Madam Chair? Sure. Thank you. And so kind of going down that vein, let me ask you this question. And once again, I do love the word moral hazard because I do think in a legislative sense, inadvertently, the legislature potentially creates moral hazards, you know, every day it's in session when it passes laws and is not aware of unintended consequences. But let me just run this one by you. My concern with the current way we assess taxes on different property classes is the way we allow both the state and the locals to basically grant commercial property tax exemptions, abatements, whatever. And my concern is that what that's doing is that's creating a moral hazard because basically the residents, the homeowner residents for our major metropolitan areas, you know, Northeast, South Central in particular, okay, they bear the brunt of that moral hazard. We talk about economic development, we talk about wanting to do new business starts, it's going to create jobs. But at the end of the day, that balloon's being squeezed and it's getting shifted back onto homeowners. And so my question is that, do you see that as a moral hazard as far as the ability of the locals and other entities basically to grant commercial property tax abates and in essence shift the tax burden from one set of property class to another?
You know, Americans for Prosperity has always taken the position that the most ideal policy when it comes to taxation is to broaden the base so that you could lower the rate. So with that being of it said, whether it's property tax, sales tax, or even income taxes to a certain extent, you know, a carve out by itself is something not ideal. If there's a way that we could find a way to broaden that base and lower the rates so that everyone sees a broad-based reduction, that is something that we will most certainly advocate for.
Okay, and then a final question, Madam Chair. Just kind of back to this, I know you haven't studied this issue, but I guess my feeling about the local ad valorem, I've looked more on this and thought more about this stuff, is this was set up many, many years ago, decades ago. And I do think the local ad valorem was basically, back to maybe the senator's comments, I think maybe there's certain basically types of property classes where the legislature doesn't want to go there. And as far as determining, is this still relevant, given our evolving economy over the past 2 centuries in Kansas? And so my question would be is that I personally have come to look at the LAVTRF as maybe trying to rectify some of the structural problems with that underlying way we assess across the property classes versus just like, say, broad property tax relief. When we talk about like the 20 mil levy and stuff like that, granting, taking that off. Do you have any comments at all about the LAVTRF as far as a possible tool to rectify structural imbalances in the way we assess across property classes?
Senator Holland, as you were prefacing your question and get to the question, what kind of ran through my mind listening to you was, I can't remember who said this quote, but it's something along the lines of, you have to judge policies by their results and not by their intentions. And while I can't speak to whether the LAVTRF, addresses the issue that you have brought up here, even if we make the assumption that it does, it is clear that when it was implemented, it created all sorts of problems, right? Property taxes still continued to rise. It created an expectation where localities expected that they were going to get state taxpayer dollars, and so they were making decisions based off of the legislature as opposed to their own constituents, right? And so what I'm saying is that with LAVTRF, it opens a precedent and a can of worms that it's going to be really hard to weigh, right? Whether it is a smaller value than, let's say, even if I grant you that assumption that it fixes that imbalance. I'm not entirely sure that it does, but even if we did that, I still think it creates a lot more problems that it may outweigh the problem you're trying to fix.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Reddy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your testimony for this. I think being in the locals and understanding property taxes as far as what do they go for, such as police, fire, and all of these other things. I do agree with you about broadening the base. I think that's the key to everything as far as our economy in the state of Kansas or in any other state. But I feel what's presented in front of me today, I feel might be the most equitable way to put money back into property taxpayers, especially with no restrictions such as you have to make this much income, or you have to be this age, or you have to have this much of a family household, or you have to have this big of a house or a commercial resident, whatever it might be. I felt like this would be most equitable, and I think for state, local, city, county, school districts to evaluate how they want to look at property taxes or formulas, that's going to take a long while. While we have some money in our coffers right now, why not give this directly back to our taxpayers, which is immediate relief? I think that's what I hear most about is property taxes, and I think they're tired of the inertia that happens between all of our government officials. So I understand what you're saying, but I feel like this might be the best way to go, at least at this point. I just wanted to know what you mean by just waiting for property taxes to shift or change, or the formulas to change, and be against this piece, which is immediate. I know you're about property taxes and creating property tax relief. So I don't understand the complete opposition, I suppose.
Thank you, Senator Reddy. I don't think I spoke to formulas or waiting for property tax relief to happen. Would you mind clarifying?
So we don't have time to debate the bill today. If you guys would like to take this offline, that would be great.
I would be
We do have
willing.
other questions. Thank you. Senator Peck.
Thank you, Mr. Austin. I won't pontificate on the bill. I will just ask a question regarding the bill. There is a provision of 3.63% of this total sales tax revenue is set aside into a fund, and then $50 million go to property tax relief. Now, do you have, and if you don't, I know this is not really fair for me to ask you, but I thought just in case AFP had knowledge, do you have knowledge of how much 3.63% of the total sales tax revenue would be, and what happens to the amount above the 50 million? And my final question on this point is this not taking more from counties that put more into the sales tax and shifting it to counties that do not put much into the sales tax from this fund for property tax relief?
Thank you for your question, Senator Peck. I can address that last question, and that answer is yes, right? By shifting that sales tax out of those county budgets for property tax relief, that's exactly what that is. That is a shift. As for the first two questions, I will say I'm no longer with Department of Revenue. I think that might be a better question suited for them. I can't think of the sales tax collection for every county, so I apologize for that.
Thank you, and we will make that request. Kathleen, if you could email that to the committee, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions, committee? I have one you touched on. So I don't think this committee has discussed it, but there's 1.5 mil that the state collects in property taxes. It's definitely over 50 million, but not over the amount of the sales tax portion for LAVTR. If we were to get to delete the 1.5 mil the state collects, and that would be property tax relief for everyone right away, and then delete the LAVTR language at the same time, because you would use that 1.5 mil money to pay for the LAVTR. It would be a tax decrease for locals. Is that something that you would be supportive of?
Yes, and I know it might sound pedantic, it might sound like I'm splitting hairs, but I think what you're suggesting really avoids, right, that moral hazard and avoids that subsidization. If the state levies 1.5 mils, by all means, the state should reduce that, and it would, minimize any sort of economic distortions. What this bill does is that it takes taxpayer dollars, gives it to localities, and then tells localities what to do, when in reality, the state doesn't control what local property taxes are. So that creates, as I said before, a precedent that kind of takes a life of its own. So short answer, yes, Senator Tyson, and that's because I think it avoids that moral hazard. It solves directly what the state can control.
Okay, thank you. Committee, okay, seeing no questions, thank you very much for your
Thank you.
testimony. Is there any other opponents or neutral? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 332. Committee will open the hearing on Senate Bill 352. Thanks, Amelia. I said 452. Apologies. No, I've been doing that all morning, subtracting one.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senate Bill number 452 relates to the Homestead Property Tax Refund Act. The bill would amend 794508A to exclude any amount attributable to taxes levied to pay for school district bonds and bond interest. When such bonds were approved by a bond election held at any time, it would exclude those amounts from any increased property tax claims beginning in tax year 2024. And I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Seeing none. Committee, this is a little unique. The bill request was made as a motion that was on legislation, so we have a fiscal note with the legislation. We do not have any conferees for Senate Bill 352. So Senator Holland.
I have a question.
Sure.
Didn't this come out of basically discussion we had on a previous bill?
This was an amendment on Senate Bill 80.
Okay. Well, how about the maker of the amendment speak to this bill? I think it's appropriate if we're going to work bills, we have at least one proponent for each of the bills that we hear. Otherwise, I'm just wondering about the process. That's all I'm asking.
Well, Senator, we're not working the bill. We are having a hearing on the bill. So is there anybody that would like to testify as a proponent on the bill? Anybody that would like to testify as an opponent? Any neutral on the bill? Seeing none, Senator Peck.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This would be a question, I guess, for staff. How would this be administered? It looks a little cumbersome to me for whoever administers this, whether it's revenue or whomever, to determine which properties were in a school district that voted for the bond. I'm just trying to figure out how this would play out, because school district boundaries bleed across county lines sometimes. And I know that's a vague question, but I just don't know how it would work.
Well, thank you, Senator. I don't know if anybody wants to address that, but they do know the school district boundaries. Like, for example, I've got Prairie View in my Senate district in Lynn County, but it also has constituents in Miami County for the school district. So it crosses county borders. They're well aware of that. They handle that with elections now and with property taxes currently.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Any other questions? Senator Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think I'll follow Senator Peck's lead and ask the reviser then the questions I have, since we have nobody to stand for this. I guess my question would be, do we have any, would there be any issues? I noticed that the bill itself basically just calls out, which I found interesting. It's talking about basically as it pertains to rebates with our Senate Bill 2239, the K-40 SVR. Do we know, is there any concerns or why the other two rebate programs are not included in this? The traditional homestead property tax rebate and then the Save Senior program?
Senator, that is because this bill introduction request was based off of a motion made on Senate Bill 80, and the motion was not, those other programs were not included in that either.
Okay, I appreciate that. And just once again, the mechanics, I want to be sure I understand this. When we talk about excluding any amount attributed to taxes levied to pay for school district bonds and bond interests, okay, what are we basically doing there to the school districts? What is happening to the monies that they would be receiving?
Amelia, do you mind?
This bill only relates to the rebate claims under this program. The taxing subdivisions that these claims, kind of the tax numbers that are used for the calculation, they are still whole. They're still receiving their tax payments and levies and assessments. These programs don't change any of that.
I just want to be sure I want to be sure I comprehend exactly what this thing does, though. So what is I mean, obviously under the typical rebate scheme, the state reimburses the county. The county basically distributes, I mean, all the local taxing units are getting whole. What is happening, or how is the school district, when it comes to district bonds or bond interest, how is this being treated differently?
I'll try to walk through a hypothetical using rounded numbers to speak to what that would work like. So the refunds under the program are based upon the growth in the total property taxes paid relative to the base year. And so in working this out, the form for the refund would probably have to parse out what fraction of the property tax growth is attributable to the mill levies levied specifically for school district bond and interest payments. And so to use what might be, I'm going to try to do an easy hypothetical. If a taxpayer had 160 total mills that were levied by them, and let's imagine that 40 of those mills are levied by the school district, 20 mills pursuant to the statewide school finance levy, and then the other 20 pursuant to the other school district mill levies, which are by and large their local option budget, their capital outlay, and then their bond and interest levy if they have any bond debt. And so imagine that of those 40 mills, 20 of them are the general fund, maybe 10 of them are their local option budget, 5 are capital outlay, and 5 are bond and interest. Those 5 mills of bond and interest would in essence be excluded from the rebate that is paid under the claim.
That would go back to the property owner, correct?
What?
That would go back to the property owner.
Yeah, it changes the refund that the state
Understood.
would
So-
pay to the property owner, but
Right,
it doesn't
so-
impact the
right,
revenues that
so-
go to the school.
Understood. That's exactly what I needed to know. Thank you.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions? Seeing none, we're going to close the hearing on Senate Bill 452. I'm going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 480. Amelia, will you give us an overview? Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Senate Bill number 480 relates to the State Board of Tax Appeals and would authorize teleconference and video conference hearings in their small claims and expedited hearings division. Specifically, the bill would amend current statute to provide that the small claims hearings may be conducted by teleconference or video conference as directed by the chief hearing officer or a designee. And it would also remove the current location requirements that are for hearings that are in the statute. And the bill would take effect from and after publication in the statute book. And I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, committee. Senator Hall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This sounds like some policy maybe we had in sessions past.
Senator, we have addressed this issue before, but I think this is a little unique situation. Maybe the chairman would be willing to address it, but I do know that we have talked to that before. So.
Madam Chair, I just apologize for my confusion. I didn't know if this is one of the bills that basically we never got across the finish line last year, or if this is maybe a tweak or an expansion of
It's a tweak.
something that we have. Okay,
It's
very
an
good.
expansion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can I have one comment?
Yes.
And I honestly can't recall off the top of my head, but I know we've also dealt with the Board of Tax Appeals hearings generally. This is specific to their small claims and expedited hearings division, which is their more informal process for certain property types and certain types of appeals.
Yes, and I think they have the authority to do this, but this would just be clarifying that. So, any other questions? Thank you. Thanks, Amelia. Committee, we don't have any proponents on it, except for written, Jay Hall and Mark Toom. Is there anybody that would like to testify for the bill? Great, welcome. And I would like to acknowledge that we do have the chairman, Kristen Wheeler, in the audience, and board member Tom Brown. And thank you for being here today.
How's that? Okay. Basically, this is a pro-taxpayer bill. It's not going to cost hardly any money. We would need about the maximum 4 additional Zoom licenses for the hearing officers to conduct that. And I think we could probably absorb that. But right now, it's set up where the hearings have to be in the county where the property's at, or the adjacent property, or in the adjacent county. Well, due to COVID, those properties where we were holding the hearings at, churches and libraries and abandoned school buildings, those are not made available to us anymore. And we tried this on a pilot basis, and it was very successful to do this by telephone. And we would like to expand it to give these homeowners, say in Western Kansas or anywhere in the state, a chance to do it by telephone or video conference.
Thank you. Committee, any questions? Would you mind submitting written testimony for us
Sure.
for the record? That'd be great. And I would just make one suggestion. Don't tie yourself to one vendor. Maybe look at options on, he knows what I'm getting at,
Okay.
on tech vendors, video vendors. Thank you very much. Is there any other proponents for the testimony? Any opponents? Seeing none, any neutral? We'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 480. Committee, I do hope to work some of these. I'm not sure we'll have time tomorrow, but definitely Thursday. So, is there any other business to be brought before the committee? Seeing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.